So, welcome to today's presentation. My name is Peter Yusuf, Senior Market Analyst at IronFX. With me, I have Fedos Bandelidis, also Market Analyst at IronFX. We are going to have a small chat about the UK elections today, guys. And it's quite interesting. There seems to be about a shift in the governance of the UK. Fedos, any ideas?
Well, essentially what we've been seeing is that Labour is in the lead. Like if we also look at the FT's recent poll, they're predicting a majority in Parliament for Labour, essentially ending the Conservatives' 14-year rule and ushering a new government under Keir Starmer.
Actually, you know what's interesting? It's a bit puzzling that over the past months, you saw that, okay, we had some ups and downs for both the Labour and the Conservative Party, but there was a steady margin of 20%, around 20%, where Labour practically led the polls throughout the period. And I think that even in, if I'm correct, the last month or so, where we saw a small rise of Reform UK, still the Labour Party led the polls by 20%. And that didn't edge a bit.
I would agree with that. And the issue is that not only Labour was leading by around 20 points for the past month or so, it's more of a discontent with the ruling Conservatives Party. And in particular, I think the downfall started with Liz Truss as well, had one of the, if not the shortest period as Prime Minister. So I think the decline started from there, and then the polls simply reflected that. What was more interesting was not the lead that Labour had, which was a steady roughly 20%, but it was when Labour's polling dipped, it did not go to the Conservatives. Instead, the Liberal Democrats and Reform UK gained on the Conservatives' losses. And now we have the Conservatives essentially battling for third, perhaps even fourth place.
Really? That bad?
If you look at the Lib Dems from the FT's poll in terms of the parliamentary majority, they have them at around 64 seats and then the Lib Dems at 61. So they're battling for second place in terms of the parliamentary projections, but they could be battling also for third in terms of the overall voting intentions of the UK general public, which had Reform UK at around 16% and the Conservatives at 21%. So essentially, it looks like it's going to be a tremendous loss for the Conservatives in this UK general election season.
Okay, that's interesting. It's going to be a very, very interesting close call. Anyway, I think that, okay, you mentioned Liz Truss and the short, okay, governance it had. It was for about 2 months, right?
Roughly that.
Yeah, but okay, it was a blunder after blunder. We had the start even by Cameron with Brexit, which they didn't mean to actually exit the EU.
But they did.
But they did. And then it was the mess with May, where she had to manage the Brexit procedure, and she wasn't actually in favor of Brexit either, but she had to manage it, and it didn't pan out quite well. Then we had Boris Johnson, which finalized Brexit, yes, but that was a mess with COVID. And then you had Liz Truss, 2 months, and we have now Rishi Sunak, which is also disappointing. So it's a wonder how long they were able to manage to stay up there.
It is
for
incredible.
14 years, yeah, it was an issue. Anyways, the question now comes to what Labour is going to be doing, right?
Well, Labour has promised a few things, and I think we should start off with the economy, which was sustained economic growth, wealth creation, pro-business and pro-worker, and a national wealth fund. Now, it sounds very nice, and the promises, I think, from a more general perspective from Labour have been very modest. So with the polls that we discussed before, the 20% lead that they had over the Conservatives, Labour really hasn't had to do that much. All they've had to do is minimize their blunders, don't overpromise to the UK public so that the Conservatives can't use that as cannon fodder in, let's say, campaign videos, etc.
Yeah.
So something modest and something achievable, and then simply not blundering it at the end of the line. And that's quite easy. So essentially what we're seeing from Labour is a very modest, I'd say, promise in terms of the economy.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. okay, this wealth creation part was repeated time after time after time, and actually it's going to be quite questionable how they're going to be going pro-business and pro-work at the same time. That's another big question mark. I think that they are going to be tightening regulation in the financial markets most probably as well. That's something which has not been mentioned, but it seems to be in the works, or you can read it between the lines. Interesting also will be about taxes. Now, they promised that there will not be any more taxes for the working people, but that would imply that there could still be tax for corporations. So how's that going to go down with the businesses in the UK?
I mean, if they are going to raise taxes, I mean, they're saying they're not going to raise taxes for working people, but then for your plans of climate and energy, education, and everything else that they're promising, you need funds. You need a way to fund your plans. So if you're not going to be raising taxes for working people, and then you want to be pro-business, which implies that you may not be raising taxes for companies and businesses as well, then how are you going to exactly fund your program?
Yeah, most probably through leverage, more loans,
But then
national debt.
wouldn't that place the UK in a worse economic situation in the long run?
Yep, that's another issue. Practically, it's a big question mark, in my opinion, that should any UK government want to invest, they will have to go through national debt. And that's going to be practically endangering the economic outlook of the UK, because should the UK economy not manage to have sufficiently high GDP rates in the coming years, the national debt will be pretty hard to service. And it could turn back to austerity measures.
And
once
then
again.
that could be a strategic entry for the Conservatives in the next election to campaign on and then return to power. So essentially, the last 14 years, they've taken the economy, and in the past, I'd say 2-3 years, they've led it down a very nice decline.
Yeah.
And now, right about when the ship is about to sink, they're getting off, giving it to Labour, and then coming back as the so-called saviors.
Let's get to the national pride of the UK, NHS. Health and care. They promised to cut waiting times in the NHS. The NHS is a mess, by the way, right now.
It's horrible.
And in order to do that, they will have to invest in new jobs and more doctors, more paramedics, etc., etc. It's going to be difficult to actually achieve it, and I don't think that it will be achievable anytime soon. Most probably it will take years. However, progress could be made if there is the political will and if they invest enough money in it.
If they do get the parliamentary majority, then it is possible that they could push in new regulation that may help this plan. But in reality, the NHS it's incredible, the waiting times, how long it takes for you to see a doctor. And then it's really a mess, just like you said. So how they're going to fix it in a few years' time, I don't see that happening. I think it's more of a macro plan. So if they are going to do something, it's going to have to be with building blocks, or let's not forget that they could renege on their promise as well. So it could be just a pre-election promise, which might change once they're in power, and then they see the reality of the situation.
Okay. Now, the other big plan is climate and energy, long-term clean power by 2030. Another one which will require heavy investment in renewables. I think overall we're seeing up until now only issues. Also, defense, boost defense spending to 2.5% of the GDP.
If I'm not mistaken, the Conservatives also made a pledge to boost defense spending.
That's something which they have in common. However, the question mark is, okay, how useful it will be. International tensions are out there. Anyway, it's a heavy, heavy fiscal investing plan in all areas throughout. And another hot issue for the UK would be migration. Now, they have promised to reduce net immigration. They are planning to scrap the current government's plan to actually dislocate immigrants to Rwanda,
which never really left the ground.
Yeah. So that's a promise which self-fulfilling prophecy. and reform Britain's point-based immigration system and restrictions on visas. Now, there's a big question here about immigration. One of the big reasons why the UK voted in favor of Brexit was exactly to reduce immigration, incoming immigration in the UK, to control the borders.
Which really hasn't changed that much since they've taken on.
And now
to the
they're
left.
taking even more, not the refugees, migrants mostly. It's another big hot issue. Anyway, I think the last issue I would be mentioning here would be on the list. We have education, where they're discussing about 6,500 new teachers in key subjects. And they also want to fund free breakfast clubs and practically open 3,000 new nurseries. That would be a first.
That would be very nice, but I think it all comes back to the economy. How are you going to fund this plan? Renewable energy, then defense, 2.5% of GDP, cutting the waiting time in the NHS. You're promising not to essentially raise taxes, and you're pro-business and pro-worker. And then you want to create a national wealth fund, wealth creation, but you're going to be spending a significant amount of money in order to achieve these promises. So the question is, how exactly do they plan on actually funding this plan if they're not going to be raising taxes and they're going to be pro-business and pro-worker at the same time?
I think they will have to raise taxes, and they will have to raise also national debt. There's no other way out. If they want to do all of this, there's no other way. And the other big question I'm setting at the end is, okay, a possible win of Labour, could that have a beneficial effect on the Brexit deal? Could it smoothen out the relationships between the EU and the UK?
The tensions could be warmer, considering Labour's tone has been a bit, I'd say, more pro-European when compared to the Conservatives who led Brexit, who went and had the discussions with EU leaders. So I think Labour might be a bit more friendly towards the EU. So that might be better in terms of cooperation and then the agreements. But still, if I was the EU, I wouldn't give them much leeway. I would want to punish the UK, regardless of which party is in power. The UK decided to leave the European Union, and as such, they should be punished for that. Whether that should be in terms of imposing trade restrictions, as we see currently, making it harder for UK exporters to bring their goods into the EU, that depends. But perhaps, yes, I'd say a bit of a more warmer relationship with the EU, but from a fundamental level, I don't think much is going to change.
Well, let's not forget that in the negotiations, the UK is in the weakening side. Okay. Another issue which was quite interesting, you have made a hint at it. It's about the position. And it's going to be interesting to see what would happen if the Lib Dems actually come close to the Conservative Party regarding the position in the UK Parliament after the elections. Could we expect, I would expect a harsher criticism on behalf of Lib Dems than the Conservatives. And I'm saying this because Lib Dems are far more business-oriented and economy-oriented. That's something that the Conservatives didn't have. With the latest poll actually providing some views that, okay, they could be very close, they could be also very distant.
But still, it is a significant increase for the Lib Dems, regardless of how we see this. Even, let's say, the Focal Data MRP July 3rd, which has Conservatives at 108 and the Lib Dems at 57, it's still a tremendous increase for the Lib Dems. Essentially, they're making them the third largest party in the UK, and they're gaining even more parliamentary seats. Now, what would be interesting is if they actually come in second, not even a close third. If they actually append the Conservatives and then become the main opposition party, that would essentially bring an end to Britain's, I'd say, two-party system of the Conservatives and Labour. So it might lead to more deals, negotiations, which could be or could be not beneficial to the UK economy. But I would like to see the Lib Dems surpassing the Conservatives. It would be very interesting to see how the
very interesting twist
political
indeed.
dynamic changes after that.
Okay. Do you see the chance for far-right Reform UK actually to gain some points in the coming years under Labour government?
I think this is a test for Reform UK. Even if they don't get a significant number of seats, even gaining, I'd say, for example, 16% or 18% of the vote, but not winning any constituencies, that would still be a significant win for them. I think it could set the foundations for them to actually challenge and gain more seats in the future. And what would be interesting is if the Conservatives flip over to Reform UK, and then it's just Labour, Lib Dems, and Reform UK, and then the Conservatives drop down even further. So depending on how Reform UK does in these elections, I think could set the stage for the next decade or so for Reform UK trying to make a play, perhaps at the Premiership.
So practically it's an opportunity for Farage. Okay, it's going to be interesting to see. Okay. The other question, last question about the UK political scene. Rishi Sunak, what's the future?
Rishi Sunak, I think, is gone. Rishi has, if you ask me, he's out of touch with reality. The gimmick on the underground with the backpack that costs around 10,000 was, I'd say, to be kind, not very well received from the majority of the public in the UK, because it just shows how out of touch he is with the people. And the fact that he's incredibly wealthy and the comments he makes don't really resonate with the working people, I don't think he really has a future in politics. I think Rishi was the best alternative, perhaps after Sunak and Braverman. So Rishi looked like a good choice as prime minister, but then in reality, as election season has now come to a close, it's shown that he's not really made for this, or the public doesn't really like him. If you look at his polling figures, the way the Conservatives are expected to perform in these elections shows that under his leadership, even though it's not been that long, the Conservative Party has declined significantly.
Yeah.
So,
but once again, I think that Rishi Sunak is paying the sins of his precursors.
well,
of Liz Truss, of Boris, of everybody before him.
Well, if we take that into account, if the Conservatives come in second in terms of the parliamentary elections, we could see Rishi gaining a position as a shadow minister. So the opposition's on the opposition bench.
I don't know if he has any reason to stick to politics after that. Oh, okay. Anyways, other question. Market-wise, I think that a possible Labour win by wide majority could provide some stability in the UK political scene. It's still question mark where the UK economy will be heading. But in the short term, I think that a strong result, strong win, a wide majority by the Labour Party could actually provide some stability, even some bullish tendencies for the pound. I don't know about your UK stock markets. That's another big question.
I would agree with you on a short-term basis. So after the elections for about perhaps even a month, up until they get organized.
A week.
A week.
Not more.
Let's say a week. So after a week, I think the pound might strengthen if Labour gains a clear parliamentary majority.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's that much influential. I think it would be more interesting to see who comes in second or third. So Labour is expected to win a majority in parliament. Anything lower could weigh on the pound, could increase instability. We might even see another election coming soon if they don't get that majority. But with the majority of polls giving them that majority and then looking at what the UK general public has been polled around 40%, I think that's a given. I think it might be more impactful on who comes in second and if the Conservatives face the so-called extinction level.
Yeah.
So I think that might be more
when
influential.
it's going to be an extinction event. Okay, let's switch out of politics. Let's have a look at monetary policy. Market are expecting more or less BOE to start cutting rates in its next meeting. That tends to weigh somewhat on the pound. Actually, I would expect that most probably the bank will be cutting rates. Another cut is expected in the December meeting. So up until now, we have politics which may be providing in the short term some support for the pound. Monetary policy-wise, the other wing of the fundamentals maybe weighing a bit on the pound. The coming week, we have also the GDP rates of the UK coming out. Now, they are expected to accelerate a bit. They were at stagnation levels, and that could more or less brighten the macroeconomic outlook of the UK. That could provide some support for the pound. Signals are a bit mixed. We have some uncertainty, I think, in the markets. Once again, I would like to see how US stock markets will be reacting, UK stock markets will be reacting. That's another big question, how the city will be reacting. And other than that, I would expect fundamentals to lead the pound the coming week. What's your take?
I think the GDP rates might be more influential. Fundamentals I would agree with. The issue that we have is tomorrow we have the US employment data. So the initial market reaction after the UK election could be overshadowed from the release from the US.
Yeah.
So that might take a bit of the spotlight away from the UK and over to the US again.
Let's not also forget the possibility that some US traders may take a long weekend, given that we have the 4th of July today. It's a public holiday. They may want to take a bridge gap practically over Friday. We may see some thin trading conditions applying in the markets in the coming days. Tomorrow, at least.
It would be very interesting to see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah.
First, I'd like to see the results of the election, see how the pound reacts, and then I would wait for the US employment data and see whether that outweighs the impact of the UK elections. And for next week, it would be very interesting to see if Labour gets elected with a majority and they take credit for the acceleration of the GDP rates of the UK. And then if the UK economy is expected to, from a monetary perspective, the bank is expected to cut rates, which could ease the financial conditions around the UK economy, which could essentially boost Labour's narrative that they're actually helping the economy, whereas it's simply monetary policy that might be easing.
BOE has issued a warning, I think that was on Monday, that over 3 million mortgages are to be adversely affected over the coming months up until the actual effect of the rate cuts is being delivered to the market.
Okay.
So that could be more or less something which in the public eye could weigh a little bit on the administration. However, that remains to be seen. Another final question just before we leave. Switching topics now. EU. We have the French elections, second round on Sunday. Now, the first round was clearly Marine Le Pen, but over the past few days, we saw that Mélenchon and a number of, others, not so much of Macron, but a couple of other parties tried to consolidate and put up some resistance and buffer the possible wins of far-right national rally. I think that on a constituency part, we're going to be seeing some surprises in the coming Sunday.
From what I've seen in the past few days, we've seen from the leftist alliance and Macron's party, we've seen candidates dropping out for them to essentially form what I'd call strategic voting.
Yeah.
So you're removing candidates from the left so that your base can amass around a particular set of candidates to boost the odds of forming either a minority government or a coalition between different parties in order to beat Marine Le Pen's RN party. The question is, will this be enough? And if you ask me, I think RN will still come in first. And the question is now whether or not they will have that majority. And if they don't, will they still attempt to form that government with their leader as prime minister? Or will they allow the leftist alliance to potentially take a stab?
Actually, the left, Mélenchon, is not so market-friendly either. So it's a double-edged sword for the markets, the French elections. And we are going to expect to see some volatility on Monday's opening on Europe pairs and the French stock markets. It's going to be interesting because we have the UK elections today. That's volatility for pound pairs. We have the US employment data for June tomorrow on Friday. On Sunday, we are having the French election, so we most probably will have some volatility on Monday for Euro pairs as well.
And then if we're taking it from a more broader perspective, we also have the USD against the JPY at historic levels, so we're expecting a potential market intervention from the BOJ.
At some point, there should be a market intervention by BOJ.
So essentially, a lot of volatility in the upcoming week.
And a lot of uncertainty, yeah. So that should sum it up. From all of us here at IronFX, best wishes for solid trading.